She was shaking. The corridor was black, the power was out, and Emily Carter could hear them climbing the stairs. Two men, heavy boots, no hesitation. She had 30 seconds, maybe less. Every instinct she had spent years burying clawed back to the surface at once. She pressed her back against the cold wall, slowed her breathing, and counted their steps. The other nurses had run. The doctors had locked themselves in offices. Nobody came for her. Nobody ever did. So when the stairwell door finally burst open, Emily didn't scream. She stepped forward and introduced herself properly. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because the story you're about to hear is only the beginning. Like this video so more people can find it, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The hospital smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee, which was how Emily Carter knew it was a Tuesday. Mondays smelled like anxiety, the sharp, sour kind that clung to the intake staff after a weekend of backed-up emergencies. Wednesdays smelled like resignation. But Tuesdays had that specific combination of industrial cleaner and the overnight pot that someone always left on too long, and it was oddly grounding. She pushed through the staff entrance at Calloway General Medical Center in the city of Drenwick, with her badge already in her teeth, her left sneaker half unlaced, and a paper cup of gas station coffee cooling in her hand. Carter, the charge nurse at the main desk, a heavy-set man named Dale Briggs, didn't look up from his clipboard. "You're on trauma overflow and the East Wing medication rounds. Hale wants all the charts restaged before he comes in." Emily transferred the badge from her teeth to the lanyard around her neck. "Good morning to you too, Dale." "He's already called down twice. It's 6:43. "That's what I said. He called at 6:15 and 6:30. She finished clipping her badge, took a long pull of her coffee, and started walking. There was no point in saying anything else. Dr. Victor Hale, chief of surgery at Calloway General, operated on a schedule that existed somewhere outside the laws of human decency, and the most efficient response to his demands was simply to move faster than the complaint could follow. Calloway General sat at the edge of Drenwick's older district, a city of about 200,000 people built along the Carrow River Delta, where the winters came hard and the insurance reimbursements came slow. The hospital had 400 beds, 2 trauma bays, a surgical wing that needed renovation it would never quite get, and a staffing situation that the administration described as lean and the nurses described as something considerably less printable. Emily had worked here for 14 months. Before that, before Drenwick, before the gas station coffee and the overnight shifts and the borrowed scrubs 2 sizes too big, there was something else. She didn't talk about it. Most of her coworkers had decided she was quiet because she was timid. It was an easy assumption. She had a way of making herself small, of tucking herself into the edges of a room, of responding to aggression with a slight tilt of her head and a polite, neutral expression that people often read as confusion. She dropped things, charts mostly, and once a tray of specimen cups that had produced an embarrassingly loud crash in the middle of a hallway. She wore her hair in a plain ponytail and her scrubs bagged around her frame, and she apologized frequently for things that were not her fault because it was faster than arguing. Dr. Hale had noticed her on her 3rd day. "You," he said, pointing at her across the nursing station. "What did you do with the Prentice post-op notes?" "They're in the chart, Dr. Hale, filed under yesterday's date." "They're not where I put them. They were misfiled. I corrected them." He stared at her for a long moment with the particular expression of a man deciding whether the target in front of him was worth the effort. He decided she was. "Don't touch my charts." "Of course," she said. He walked away. She went back to her medication cart. 2 other nurses exchanged a glance behind her back, and Emily pretended not to see it. That was the beginning of a pattern that 14 months had done nothing to change. She arrived early and stayed late. She caught errors. A decimal point off in a pediatric dosage, a contraindicated drug combination in a post-surgical order, a patient whose blood pressure had been trending wrong for 6 hours because the overnight nurse was managing 4 other crises simultaneously. She fixed what she could fix without drawing attention to herself, and the things she couldn't fix quietly, she flagged through the proper channels, in writing, with timestamps. She had a very precise relationship with documentation. It was one of the things the Army had taught her, though she would not have said that out loud. The morning of the Tuesday in question started badly, and got worse in the way that hospital mornings sometimes do. Not with a single catastrophic event, but with a long, grinding accumulation of small disasters that wore people down until the big one hit. By 7:30, Emily had already completed the East Wing rounds, flagged a potassium discrepancy in room 412, and talked a 19-year-old patient through the mechanics of her own breathing because the panic attack the girl was having was severe enough to look like something cardiac until you actually sat with her for 4 minutes and counted. The girl's mother was in the hallway crying. Emily brought her a cup of water and explained briefly and clearly that her daughter was going to be fine. By 8:15, she was back at the nursing station documenting when Dale leaned over and said, in a low voice, "Hale's on the floor." She didn't react. "Emily." "I heard you. He's in a mood." "Dale," she said, not looking up. "When is he not?" The answer to that question arrived approximately 11 seconds later in the form of Dr. Victor Hale rounding the corner with his white coat open and his jaw set and his eyes already scanning the station for something that wasn't right. He was 54, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago and had since settled into something harder. He had trained at programs that mattered and published research that fewer people had read than he believed and operated with genuine technical skill and the near-total inability to recognize that skill in others. "Carter." He stopped 3 feet from the station. "Where are the Ortega consult notes?" "Waiting on radiology. The imaging came back at 7, but the written report hasn't posted yet." "Why not?" "Because radiology posts their reports when they post them." A small silence. "I beg your pardon?" "I called down at 7:20, she said. "They said 45 minutes. It's been 50. I can call again." Hale looked at her the way he always looked at her, with a species of contempt that had nothing to do with competence and everything to do with the fact that she was quiet and female and wore scrubs that didn't fit and occasionally dropped things. "Do that," he said. "And in the future, when I need information, I need it before I ask." "Understood." He moved on. Dale exhaled. The 2 nurses on either side of the station went carefully back to their screens. Emily picked up the phone and called radiology. The crisis hit at 9:47. His name was Gary Mullen, 41 years old, brought in by ambulance after a construction site accident. Initial report from the paramedics was blunt chest trauma. He'd taken the edge of a falling beam to the left side, cracked ribs almost certainly, possible pulmonary contusion. He was alert in the ambulance, which had given the paramedics reasonable confidence. He was not alert when they wheeled him through the trauma bay doors, and his blood pressure was doing something that made the intake resident's face go wrong. Emily heard the code from the hallway and moved toward it before the overhead announcement finished. The trauma bay was already crowded. 2 residents, a respiratory tech, one of the overnight nurses pulling a double. The senior resident, a 3rd-year named Dr. Parks, was running the response. She was competent, Emily knew, but she was also working on a differential that had landed on pulmonary contusion and hadn't moved yet, and the patient's neck veins were doing something that the pulmonary contusion diagnosis did not explain. Emily stepped to the left side of the gurney and put 2 fingers on Gary Mullen's neck. His trachea was shifted. Not much. A millimeter, maybe 2. It was the kind of thing you could miss if you weren't looking for it specifically, and Parks wasn't looking for it specifically because she was focused on the oxygen sats and the BP and the sequence of interventions that pulmonary contusion required. "Dr. Parks," Emily kept her voice even, "I think we have a tension pneumo." Parks glanced at her. The glance lasted approximately 1 second longer than dismissal, but shorter than consideration. "We're treating for contusion. His trachea is deviated. His breath sounds on the left are absent. His BP is, I can read the monitor, Carter." "I know. I'm saying I think the pressure's building. If we wait for imaging, we're not making that call without imaging." Emily looked at the monitor. Gary Mullen's blood pressure was 78/40 and falling. His oxygen saturation was 82 and falling faster. She looked at Parks. Parks was already turning to order the portable chest X-ray. There was no time for a portable chest X-ray. "Dr. Parks," Emily said. She did not raise her voice. She simply put a weight behind it that she normally did not allow herself to use. "He is going to arrest in the next 90 seconds if we don't decompress that chest." The room went quiet. Parks turned around slowly. She looked at Emily, really looked at her for the first time in the way people look at something when they're trying to figure out if it's a threat or a resource. Gary Mullins sat hit 79. "Set it up," Parks said. Emily was already moving. She had the large bore needle in her hand from the crash cart before Parks finished the sentence, and she talked the respiratory tech through the positioning in a voice that was calm and efficient and left no room for anyone to ask where she had learned to sound like that. The needle went in at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, and the hiss of released pressure was one of the more satisfying sounds Emily had heard in 14 months. Gary Mullins' blood pressure started climbing at 9:51. He was in the OR for a chest tube by 10:15 and stable by noon. Victor Hale appeared at Emily's elbow at 10:42. She was finishing her documentation at the nursing station, thorough, time-stamped, accurate, and she did not look up when his shadow fell across her keyboard. "Parks tells me you intervened in the trauma bay," he said. "I assisted. She tells me you pushed a needle decompression call over her initial assessment. I flagged a presentation that was consistent with tension pneumothorax. Dr. Parks made the call." That's a very careful way to describe overriding a resident. Emily finally looked up. The patient's blood pressure was 78. His SAT was 79. He was 30 seconds from a PEA arrest. There wasn't time to... There is always time for the proper chain of command. She held his gaze. Not always. Hale leaned slightly forward, which was his preferred physical grammar for intimidation. "You are a floor nurse, Carter, a floor nurse with a habit of inserting yourself into situations that are above your training. I don't know where you got the idea that your instincts are worth more than the clinical judgment of the physicians on this team, but I'm telling you now, clearly, so there's no ambiguity, that it ends. You will do your rounds, you will administer medications, you will document, and you will not touch another trauma patient unless a physician directly asks you to. Do I make myself understood?" There were 4 other people within hearing distance of this conversation. Emily was aware of all of them. "Yes," she said. Hale straightened. He was already turning away when he paused, as if something had occurred to him. "And fix your badge," he said. "It's crooked." He walked away. Emily looked down at her badge. It was not crooked. She fixed it anyway because it was faster than the alternative. She went back to her documentation. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. The afternoon passed in the way long hospital shifts pass, not peacefully, but rhythmically, the rhythm of a system absorbing continuous small emergencies and processing them into outcomes that ranged from good to acceptable. Emily did her rounds. She administered medications. She documented. She talked to patients' family through a post-op recovery that was going exactly as planned, even though to a family with no medical background it looked nothing like as planned. She ate half a granola bar standing up at the medication cart and drank 2 cups of coffee that tasted like they had been brewed sometime during the previous administration. At 3:15, she found a labeling error on a blood draw that would have sent the wrong samples to the wrong patient's file. She corrected it, documented it, and submitted an incident report. At 4:40, she sat with a 14-year-old boy who was alone in a room waiting for his appendectomy and talked to him about baseball, specifically about the Drenwick Otters, who had not won anything significant in 11 years, but whom the boy defended with the specific passionate loyalty of someone who had chosen his team before the age of reason and would not be talked out of it now. She thought that was admirable. At 6:03, her phone buzzed. She was in the break room pulling her jacket off the hook when she looked at the screen. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, which was what she normally did with unknown numbers. But something in her, something trained and tuned and never fully quiet, made her answer instead. "Emily Carter." Her voice was automatic, neutral. The voice on the other end was male, low, and careful, not panicked. People who had trained the same way she had did not panic, but they got very precise when things went wrong, and the voice on her phone was very precise. "It's Weston. Don't react." She didn't react. Marcus Weston had been a Special Forces medic attached to the same operational unit as Emily for 8 months in a country that her current employer did not know she had ever been in. She had not heard his voice in 4 years. "I'm listening," she said. "There's a federal convoy moving through your region, high-value passenger. I can't tell you her name on this line, but she's a director-level intelligence official, and she's been traveling on a route that was supposed to be classified." Emily walked to the corner of the break room and lowered her voice. Was. Her convoy was hit 90 minutes ago on Route 9 outside Dalvern. 7 casualties, multiple wounded. She's critical. They're transporting her to the nearest Level 1 trauma center. The nearest Level I trauma center to Dalvern. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. Calloway, she said. Calloway General. ETA approximately 40 minutes. Emily. A pause. The people who hit that convoy aren't done. There was a secondary team. We don't know where they went. She was already moving toward the door. Does anyone at the hospital know what's coming? You're the first call. Why me? Because you're there, Weston said, and because you're you. She didn't answer that. She pushed out of the break room and started walking, fast, toward the administrative wing, and her mind was running the way it had not run in 14 months. Not in the careful, deliberate, self-contained way she used it here, but in the old way, the operational way, the way that had kept her and other people alive in places where the margin for error was measured in seconds. A federal official, critical condition, inbound, with a secondary threat team unaccounted for, and the only person in this building who knew about any of it was the nurse everyone thought was clumsy. Dr. Daniel Mercer, Calloway General's chief medical officer, was a 60-year-old man with the energy of someone 15 years younger and the patience of someone considerably older. He had practiced emergency medicine for 3 decades, spent 6 years as a Navy flight surgeon, and returned to civilian practice with the specific quiet authority of someone who had seen enough actual chaos to stop being impressed by manufactured drama. He was the reason Emily had applied to Calloway General specifically, though she had never told him that. She found him in his office, still in his coat, reading something on his tablet that he immediately set down when she appeared in his doorway. Carter. He read her face. Sit down. I can't. Dr. Mercer, I need about 3 minutes of your time and I need you to trust me while I use them. He looked at her for a long moment. In 14 months, she had never asked him for anything except proper documentation trails and once, a more ergonomic medication card arrangement for the overnight wing. He put his tablet on the desk and folded his hands. Go. She told him what Weston had told her. She told him clean and fast, in the order that mattered most. Incoming VIP patient, critical trauma, federal escort, unknown secondary threat. She left out Weston's name, and she left out the operational details that would have required explanation she couldn't give in 3 minutes. When she finished, Mercer was already on his feet. How confident are you in this information? Very. Source? Someone who doesn't get things wrong. He looked at her again, the same way Parks had looked at her in the trauma bay, but with something additional behind it, something that was trying to reconcile what it thought it knew with what it was currently seeing. Emily, he said, and it was the first time in 14 months that he had used her first name. How do you know these things? She met his eyes. Right now, it doesn't matter. We need to prep 2 trauma bays, expand the blood bank draw protocol, clear the surgical suite, and get security to do a physical sweep of all non-public access points on the lower floors before the convoy arrives. A long pause. All right, Mercer said. He picked up his phone. Then let's move. It took Mercer 22 minutes to get the pieces in place without triggering a full public-facing alert. He was good at operational quiet, which Emily had suspected but now confirmed. He pulled in the senior trauma surgeon, Dr. Adisa Okafor, without explaining why. He ordered the blood bank draw through a standing protocol that didn't require committee approval. He got security moving through a noise complaint report, which was the kind of bureaucratic misdirection that Emily respected enormously. Hale found out at minute 17. He appeared at the trauma bay doors with his jaw set and his voice already at the particular register he used when he believed authority was being exercised without his involvement. Mercer. What's going on? Why is my surgical suite being prepped without a consult? Incoming trauma, Mercer said. Federal escort. Why wasn't I notified through the standard? Because there wasn't time. Victor, not now. Hale's eyes moved to Emily, who was at the supply cart running an inventory she had already run once, and was running again because the numbers in her head said they were short on 2 specific things, and she wanted to be certain. Why is she in here? Hale said. Because she's useful, Mercer said, and turned back to his phone. Hale stood in the doorway for 3 more seconds. Then he walked away. Emily did not watch him go. She finished the supply inventory, confirmed the two shortfalls she had suspected, and went to get them herself from the secondary storage because waiting for someone else would take longer. At 11:47, the lights in the ambulance bay lit up. Not one vehicle, not two. 4 armored black SUVs, a military medical transport, and 2 vehicles Emily recognized from the profile as Federal Escort class, heavy, low, with the specific silhouette of vehicles that were not meant to be stopped by anything short of a significant ordnance problem. Behind them, barely visible through the fog that had rolled in off the Caro River, the rhythmic white pulse of helicopter rotors above the roofline. The convoy had arrived. Calloway General's automatic bay doors opened, and the controlled chaos of a major federal trauma arrival poured through them. Uniformed personnel, plainclothed agents, medical equipment Emily didn't recognize from civilian supply chains, and at the center of it, on a transport gurney with IV lines already running and a federal medic maintaining manual pressure on a wound that Emily could assess from 8 feet away as critical, a woman in her late 50s. Emily moved. She moved the way she only moved when there was no room to pretend otherwise. The federal medic, young, capable, clearly exhausted, looked up when Emily reached the gurney and started talking before the man could object. She wasn't asking. She was reporting BP, SATS, line placement, estimated blood loss from wound location, and soak-through, airway status. The medic blinked. Then he started answering. Somewhere behind her, she heard Hale's voice. Who authorized that nurse to touch this patient? She didn't stop. There was no time to stop, and besides, Gary Mullen had been proof enough that time spent answering that question cost more than it was worth. She was already moving with the gurney toward Trauma Bay 1, talking to Okafor, who had appeared from the right with the focus of someone who had also stopped being impressed by manufactured drama some years ago. The automatic doors sealed behind them. Then, from somewhere in the lower corridor, the service wing, the part of Calloway General that didn't appear on the public-facing hospital maps, the security alarm went off. Not the standard code alarm, the building alarm, the one that meant a perimeter had been physically breached. Emily looked up. She looked at the doors. She thought about what Weston had told her. The secondary team. We don't know where they went. The alarm cut out. Not because someone had responded to it, because someone had cut the power to the security panel. The corridor lights outside the trauma bay flickered once and went dark. Emily set down the IV line she was holding, turned to the federal agent standing at the bay door and said, very quietly, "Lock this room. Do not open it for anyone who doesn't have the code you came in with. You understand me?" The agent stared at her. "Who are you?" Emily was already moving toward the door. "Someone who knows what a secondary team sounds like," she said. She pushed through the door into the darkened corridor, and the only sound was her own breathing and the weight of boots on a stairwell 2 floors below. Steady, measured, climbing without hurry, because whoever was down there believed there was no one up here worth hurrying for. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The stairwell door was at the far end of the corridor, past the utility closet and the linen cart that someone had left blocking the left side of the hallway since the previous shift. Emily registered both obstacles in the same second she registered the darkness. Not total darkness. The emergency strips along the baseboard were still drawing from the backup battery, throwing a thin red-orange line along the floor that made everything above knee height invisible, and everything below it looked like the inside of a furnace. She moved along the right wall, keeping her shoulder close to it, her sneakers quiet on the tile in a way that had nothing to do with being careful and everything to do with old muscle memory that 14 months of hospital work had not even come close to erasing. She reached the stairwell door and put her palm flat against it. Vibration. The footsteps were 1 flight below, maybe 1.5. 2 sets of weight, both heavy, both deliberate. Not hospital staff. Hospital staff hurried or shuffled. They didn't move like this, with the even, pressured tread of people who had been trained to take stairs in contested environments. Emily knew that tread the way she knew the sound of a misaligned heart valve. She had heard it often enough that it lived in her body now, not just her memory. She had no weapon. She had her hospital badge, a pen light, a pair of trauma shears in her left scrub pocket, and approximately 8 seconds before the 2 men on the stairs reached the landing below and had a decision to make about which floor they wanted. She made a decision first. She pulled the stairwell door open and went in. The backup power didn't reach the stairwell. It was pure dark in here, the kind that pressed back when you moved through it. And the sound was different: concrete walls, metal railing, the amplified echo of boots that had stopped the moment the door opened above them. Emily pressed herself flat against the interior wall, above the first landing, and waited. 3 seconds. "Movement," said a voice below, low, controlled, professional. "1 floor up," said another. They started moving again, faster now. Emily did not move. She listened to them climb, counting steps, calibrating the gap. Her heart was doing what it always did in situations like this. Not racing, but shifting, tightening its rhythm into something efficient and specific, the physiological equivalent of a system going from standby to operational. She had a name for this once. They all had names for it. The name didn't matter now. The first man came around the landing below and started up the final flight. Emily waited until he was 4 steps from the top, until the angle was wrong for him and right for her, and then she moved off the wall. The trauma shears went across the railing edge first, a sharp metallic crack that made him flinch left, which was the direction she needed him to go. When he flinched, his balance shifted, and when his balance shifted, she was already inside his reach, her left forearm across his wrist, her right hand taking the weapon that had been in his right hand before he fully understood it wasn't there anymore. She put him down without the gun going anywhere significant. He hit the concrete with the specific sound of a large man losing a balance contest and losing it badly. The second man was faster. He reached the landing before his partner stopped moving, and he came in sideways, which meant he'd had training, which meant the next 4 seconds were considerably less clean than the first 4 had been. He caught her left shoulder with an elbow, and the impact was real. She felt it crack through the joint and into her neck. But she'd taken worse and kept moving, which seemed to surprise him. People who looked like Emily Carter in their oversized scrubs and their plain ponytail were not supposed to absorb an elbow strike and keep moving. The surprise cost him exactly the half-second she needed to put the weapon she'd taken from the first man against the wall and drive her right knee into the side of his thigh hard enough that his leg buckled. She had him on the landing in 7 seconds. Her shoulder was going to hurt for a week. She stood in the dark stairwell with both men zip-tied. She'd found the restraints on the first man's gear belt, which told her a great deal about what they had come here intending to do, and listened to the building around her. No additional footsteps, no third set of weight. Either there were only 2, or the others were somewhere she couldn't hear from here. She picked up both weapons, ejected both magazines, checked both chambers, and put the unloaded firearms on the landing above the 2 men. Then she opened the stairwell door, stepped back into the corridor, and pulled out her phone. She called Mercer first. "Both stairwell intruders are secured," she said before he could speak. "East Service stairwell, between B1 and first floor. I need security and federal agents there now, and I need someone to confirm the rest of the access points are clear." A pause that lasted approximately 1 second longer than it should have. "Emily, are you hurt?" "My shoulder, it's fine. The patient?" "Okafor's working. She's critical but stable for the moment." "The security panel, we've got emergency personnel on it. Federal team is already running the perimeter." Another pause. "How did you get to them before the security team did?" "I was closer," she said. She hung up before he could ask anything else. The federal agents arrived in the stairwell within 4 minutes, 3 of them, moving with the compressed efficiency of people who did not need to be told twice that a situation was already partially resolved. The lead agent, a woman in her mid-40s with a short-cropped haircut and the kind of face that had stopped performing expressions, it didn't mean sometime in the previous decade, looked at the 2 zip-tied men on the landing and then looked at Emily with something that wasn't quite suspicion but was adjacent to it. "You did this," the agent said. It was not a question. "Yes." "With what?" "Leverage and timing." The agent looked at the unloaded weapons on the upper landing. She looked at the restraints, which were, Emily knew, a federal issue model not generally available in civilian settings. Then she looked at Emily again, and this time the expression was doing something more complicated. "Special Agent Dana Kreft," the woman said. "Who are you?" "Emily Carter. I'm a nurse here." "A nurse?" "That's what my badge says." Kreft studied her for another 2 seconds. Then she pulled out her radio and started directing her team, and Emily went back into the corridor and walked toward Trauma Bay 1, because the conversation about who she actually was could wait, and Director Rebecca Sloan, which was the name Mercer had told her quietly while she was pulling additional blood from the emergency supply, could not. The trauma bay was organized chaos when she pushed through the door, which was the best kind of chaos. The kind where everyone in the room had a specific job and was doing it. Okafor was at the head of the table, working with the focused deliberateness of a man who had already run the clinical math and did not like the numbers but intended to change them. 2 OR nurses Emily recognized were on either side. The federal medic who had come in with the convoy, his name tag said Reyes, was managing IV access with the experienced hands of someone who had done this in conditions considerably worse than a well-lit trauma bay. Emily stepped in on the left side and started pulling what Okafor needed before Okafor asked for it. She had been doing this long enough and watching carefully enough that she could anticipate the sequence. Okafor glanced at her once, the same recalibrating look she had been getting all night, and then went back to his patient. Rebecca Sloan was 57 years old, according to the federal personnel file that Kreft had transmitted to Mercer's tablet 20 minutes ago. She had taken 1 bullet through her right shoulder, which had done damage to the subclavian artery that the convoy medics had been managing with manual pressure for the better part of an hour, and a second round that had fragmented against the armored door of her vehicle and sent 3 pieces of metal into her left side, one of which had found something it shouldn't have. Her pressure was holding, barely, at 90/60, which was not good but was better than 78/40, which was where it had been when she came through the doors. She was unconscious. Emily was grateful for that. Conscious patients in this kind of pain made the work harder for everyone, including themselves. "Pressure's climbing," Reyes said from the right side of the gurney. "Good," Okafor said without looking up. "Keep it there." Emily handed him the next instrument before his hand moved. He took it without comment. She noticed his hands, briefly. They were steady, and she thought about how that was the thing nobody outside medicine ever understood, that steadiness under pressure was not the absence of fear, but the decision to do the job anyway, the muscular act of continuing, and that she had seen it in 2 very different kinds of rooms in her life, and it looked the same in both. The door opened behind her. She knew who it was before she turned, because the footsteps were a pattern she had memorized in 14 months, the way you memorize the sound of a check engine light on a car you drove every day. "Get that nurse out of my trauma bay," Hale said. Nobody moved. "I said, Victor." Okafor's voice was even, unhurried, the tone of a man who had not looked up from his patient and did not intend to. "If the next words out of your mouth are not clinically relevant, I need you to leave." A silence that had a specific texture to it, the texture of a very large assumption meeting something that wasn't going to move. "This is my department," Hale said. "This is my patient," Okafor said. "And Carter is giving me exactly what I need exactly when I need it, which means right now she is more useful to me than you are. If that changes, I'll let you know." Emily did not look at Hale. She was watching Sloane's pressure on the monitor, and the number was doing something she needed to pay attention to. "Dr. Okafor," she said, "her pressure's dropping, 0.2 drop in the last 40 seconds. Okafor looked at the monitor. "Get me the ultrasound." She already had it in her hands. Behind her, the door opened again. She heard Hale's footsteps retreat, not quickly, not submissively, but with the specific quality of someone who had decided to leave on their own terms because staying had stopped being advantageous. She filed that away and went back to work. Also, it was 12:43 in the morning when Okafor looked up from the stabilized patient and said, to no one in particular, "She's going to make it to surgery." He said it the way experienced surgeons said things like that. Not triumphantly, just factually, like a weather report for a storm that had passed. Emily was at the documentation cart, entering the last of the vitals, when Special Agent Kreft came back through the door and stopped 2 feet to her left. "We found a third access point," Kreft said. "Service elevator shaft on the north wing. Someone had bypassed the magnetic lock from the inside." Emily processed that. The inside? Which means whoever did it had building access, a key card, at minimum, possibly a code. The 2 of them looked at each other. "You're telling me this hospital has an inside source," Emily said. "I'm telling you a magnetic lock was bypassed from the inside, which means someone with building access helped those men get in. What I need to know is whether you have any idea who." Emily thought about Hale standing in the trauma bay doorway. She thought about the 14 months of being managed, sidelined, dismissed. She thought about the way he had shown up at the moment the convoy arrived, asking who had authorized things, inserting himself precisely at the points where oversight was most inconvenient. She thought about something more specific, the fact that when the secondary team had breached the building, they had gone directly for the East Service stairwell, not the main entrance, not the public elevators, the specific stairwell that connected the basement loading area to the floor where Sloan had been taken. That information was on the internal security schematic, the same schematic that lived on the administrative network, the same network that Hale had full access to. "I have a place you might want to start looking," Emily said. Well, she did not give Kreft Hale's name directly. She gave her a set of facts, access levels, timing, the specific nature of the breach point, and let the federal agent draw her own conclusions, because conclusions drawn from evidence held up better than conclusions handed to someone. And Emily had learned in a different life that the difference between information and accusation was the difference between an investigation and a dismissal. Kreft listened. She wrote nothing down, but Emily could see her processing it, filing and cross-referencing in real time, the way trained analytical minds did when they were working. "We'll need to pull access logs," Kreft said. "The system should have a full entry record for all badge swipes in the last 48 hours. Is there anyone who would have reason to delay that request?" Emily looked at her. "Probably." "Then we don't go through official channels first," Kreft said. "I have a technical analyst on the federal team. She can pull the raw data directly from the server room. Do you know where the server room is?" "Sub-basement, room B7. The door code is a 4-digit PIN that the admin team rotates monthly, but maintenance has a bypass key that's kept in the facilities office, unlocked, on a hook by the door." Kreft stared at her. "I do thorough orientation," Emily said. "Oh." The server room pull took 38 minutes. Emily did not wait in the corridor while it happened. There was no useful purpose served by waiting in a corridor, and Sloan was being prepped for surgery, and Reyes had flagged that 2 of the other convoy casualties needed follow-up assessment that nobody else had gotten to yet. She went and did that instead, moving through the secondary intake area with the methodical focus of someone who had learned long ago that the work did not stop because the situation was complicated. Both convoy casualties were stable. One had a shoulder wound that had been packed correctly by the field medics and needed monitoring. The second was a younger agent, maybe 26, with a concussion from the vehicle impact and a laceration on his left arm that had been closed roughly in the field and needed to be reopened and done properly. She did that last part herself, after explaining what she was going to do and why, and the agent, whose name was Torres, watched her work with the slightly unfocused gaze of someone managing a significant headache, but asked good questions, which she answered honestly. "You were Army?" Torres asked while she was finishing the closure. She paused for exactly 1/2 second. "What makes you think that?" "The way you move. And you didn't flinch when the secondary breach alarm went off. Everyone else either froze or ran. You went toward it." Emily tied off the last suture. "Hold still." "That's not a no. That's me asking you to hold still." He held still. She placed the final closure strip and stepped back to assess. Clean, good alignment. It would scar, but it would heal correctly, which was the part that mattered. "Thank you," Torres said. "Don't use that arm for anything for the next 3 days." "Yes, ma'am." She gathered her materials and left before he could ask anything else. Mercer found her in the hallway outside the secondary intake at 1:54 in the morning. He looked like a man who had aged approximately 3 years in the last 4 hours, which was appropriate, because 4 hours ago he had been reading a tablet in his office, and now he was standing in a hospital that had been breached by armed federal-level operatives and was currently hosting a critically injured intelligence director and 4 federal agents, and had at minimum 1 inside source somewhere in its staff or administration. "Kreft has the access logs," he said without preamble. "And she's not showing them to me yet, which means there's something in them she's processing through federal channels first." Emily looked at him steadily. "Did she say anything?" "She asked me how long Victor Hale has been on staff." Mercer's voice was careful, deliberate, like a man picking his words up off a floor and examining each one before using it. "And whether his hiring process had gone through a standard background check or an expedited one." Emily said nothing. "Emily?" Mercer stopped. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "I hired you 14 months ago because your nursing credentials were clean and your references were solid, and you showed up to the interview in scrubs that were too big for you and answered every question exactly right without volunteering anything you weren't asked. I thought you were unusual. I thought you were competent. I did not think—" He stopped again. "I don't know what I thought." "What are you asking me, Dr. Mercer?" "I'm asking who you are, not who your paperwork says you are." The corridor was empty. The backup power was still running on most of the floor, and the lighting had the flat, directionless quality of a system running at 2/3 capacity. Somewhere above them, she could hear the faint rhythm of helicopter rotors. A second aircraft had arrived over the hospital during the surgery prep, and it had not left. "I served," she said. "That's the part that matters right now." "Where?" "Multiple places. For a significant period of time, in a capacity that is not in my current personnel file." "Were you sent here?" The question surprised her, though she didn't show it. It was a reasonable question, and she had asked it herself once, in the first months, whether Port Drenwick had been assignment or accident, whether the quiet competence that had placed her at Calloway General had been chosen or directed. "No," she said. "I'm here because I wanted to stop being somewhere else." Mercer absorbed this. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said simply, "All right." "All right," she said back. "For what it's worth," he added, "whatever those access logs show, whatever Kreft finds, I want you to know that I have been watching you for 14 months, and I know what I've seen." Emily looked at him. Something in her chest did a specific thing that it did not do very often, something that was not quite gratitude and not quite relief, but was in the neighborhood of both. "Sloane's going into surgery in 20 minutes, she said. "Okafor's going to want someone who can anticipate him in there. I'll tell him you're available." "Good." She started walking. Behind her, Mercer said her name once more, quietly, and she slowed without stopping. "You should have been doing this kind of work from day one," he said. She didn't answer that. She kept walking because the answer was complicated and the surgery was not, and Okafor was going to need her in 6 minutes. Sloane's surgery lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Emily was in the OR for most of it, and the work was the kind that required her entire attention. Not because it was beyond her, but because the margin was narrow, and the stakes made everything feel closer than usual. Okafor was precise and fast, which were the two qualities that mattered most in a cavity that had been compromised this seriously, and Emily moved with him through the sequence the way she had moved through the trauma bay, anticipating rather than reacting, handing him things before he reached for them, calling out readings before he asked. Midway through the procedure, there was a moment, maybe 4 seconds, when Sloane's pressure dropped sharply and everything in the room got very still and very fast simultaneously, which was the paradox of high-stakes OR work, the way urgency and precision required opposing things from the same hands. Emily was on the left side with the suction, and she kept working with the exact same rhythm she had been using before the drop, because breaking rhythm in that moment cost more than it gained, and Okafor was already compensating, already making the adjustment, already bringing it back. The pressure came back up. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Then Okafor said, "Good," which was the most he ever said. They continued. It was 4:22 in the morning when Sloane was moved to the ICU. Emily stood outside the OR suite and washed her hands for a long time, longer than she needed to, because it was the first moment in approximately 6 hours when there was nothing immediate requiring her attention, and her body was not entirely sure what to do with that. Her shoulder ached in a deep, specific way that told her she'd partially separated something. She rotated it carefully. Functional. She had operated on worse, in places that had not had the courtesy of a clean OR and adequate lighting. She was still standing at the scrub sink when Special Agent Kreft appeared in the corridor. Kreft's face was different now. Not harder. It had been hard to begin with, but settled in a different way. The way a face settles when it has processed something it expected to find but was still not pleased to confirm. "We have the access logs," Kreft said. Emily turned off the water. "And?" "Dr. Hale's badge accessed the facility's network at 11:14 tonight, 43 minutes before your convoy arrived." Kreft paused. He pulled the building's internal security schematic. All floors, all access points, all service routes. The numbers sat in the air between them. 11:14. Emily had called Mercer at approximately 11:02. The convoy had arrived at 11:47. Hale had pulled the schematic 12 minutes after Mercer started prepping the hospital. 12 minutes after information about the incoming convoy had first circulated inside Calloway General. Someone had told him. "There's something else," Kreft said. "Our technical team found a communication sequence on the hospital's external network. Encrypted, but not encrypted well enough. The decryption is still in progress, but one of the contact addresses in the thread traces back to a shell entity associated with a man named Malcolm Rains." Emily's hands were dry now. She didn't move. "Rains is a senior federal official," Kreft said, watching her carefully. "Deputy director level. And the communication thread has timestamps going back 11 weeks. 11 weeks. The attack on the convoy had not been impulsive. It had been planned. And whatever Hale had provided to whoever was on the other end of those communications had been building for nearly 3 months. "Does Rains have access to convoy routing information?" Emily asked. "At his level? Yes. He would have known the travel clearance process, the approval chain, the route. He could have exposed it. He could have done more than expose it," Kreft said. "At his level, he could have authorized it." Emily looked at her. "You're saying the convoy was compromised from inside the federal structure. I'm saying the evidence is pointing that direction. And I'm saying that Director Sloan, who is currently in your ICU, was the target of an operation that someone very senior helped to plan." Kreft's voice remained even, but something behind it had sharpened. "Which means she's still a target, and this hospital is still a location." Emily straightened. Her shoulder protested. She ignored it. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Right now? I need you to stay close to that ICU and tell me the moment anything feels wrong." Kreft paused. "You seem to be significantly better at identifying when things feel wrong than most of the people I work with." "I've had practice." "I'd like to know more about that practice at some point." "At some point," Emily said. She pushed off from the scrub sink and started walking toward the ICU wing. Behind her, she heard Kreft get on her radio, and ahead of her, the corridor opened into the longer hallway that led to the post-surgical care unit, and somewhere in that unit, Rebecca Sloan was alive and sedated, and still, technically, a problem someone had not finished solving. She moved faster. The ICU had 2 federal agents posted outside the door when she arrived. She could see them from 20 feet out, which was intentional on Kreft's part, visible deterrence. She badged through the outer door and went inside, and the unit was quiet in the specific way of post-surgical overnight care, monitors tracking, nurses at the station, the low-frequency vigilance of people whose job was to watch for the moment's stability became something else. She took a position at the internal station and pulled up Sloan's chart on the terminal. Vitals were holding. BP better than expected. The surgical notes from Okafor were thorough and exactly as grim as she had anticipated. The subclavian repair was solid. The secondary fragment removal had been successful, but the patient was not out of the danger zone and would not be for at least another 12 hours. Emily read through it twice. Then she started her own notes, not the official chart, but the personal shorthand she had kept since her early Army days, the notation system she had developed for tracking multiple patients across complex scenarios where official records moved too slowly and unofficial memory was not reliable enough. It was a habit nobody at Calloway General had ever asked her about, because nobody at Calloway General had any reason to know it existed. She was halfway through her second page of notes when the monitor on Sloan's bay issued a single warning tone. Not an alarm. A warning, the kind that meant a number had moved outside normal range, and the system wanted a human to look at it before deciding whether it was going to become a problem. Emily was up and moving before the ICU nurse reached the door. She got to Sloan's bedside and looked at the monitor, and the number that had moved was the arterial line reading, which had shifted in a way that was consistent with 2 things: normal post-operative fluctuation, or the very early stages of something that was not normal and not post-operative. She looked at Sloan's face. The color was slightly off. Not dramatically, not the kind of off that a tired overnight nurse running 4 patients at once would necessarily flag in the first 60 seconds. Emily put her fingers on Sloan's wrist. She stood very still. She counted. Then she turned to the ICU nurse who had arrived in the doorway and said, with the specific weight she had put into her voice once before, in a trauma bay, with a man who was 30 seconds from a PEA arrest, "Get Okafor, now, and get me an ultrasound and a crash cart to this bay in the next 3 minutes. Her vitals show, I know what they show. Get Okafor." The nurse went. Emily was already beginning the assessment. Her hands were steady because they were always steady, because steadiness was not the absence of fear, but the decision to continue. And she had made that decision so many times in so many places that it no longer felt like a decision, who she was. She was working through the check sequence, mapping the progression in her mind, when the door at the far end of the ICU, not the main entrance, but the secondary access corridor that connected the unit to the surgical prep area, made a sound that had nothing to do with normal ICU operations. Not a latch, not a hinge, the specific pressured click of a door handle being tested from the outside. Emily looked up. The two federal agents were at the front entrance. The secondary door was behind her, 40 feet away, on the far side of the unit, and it was moving, slowly, carefully, by someone who believed the ICU nurses were the only people in this room. She set down the ultrasound probe. She looked at Sloan. She looked at the door. She had one agent who could see her if she signaled, and she had approximately 8 seconds before whoever was on the other side of that secondary door finished deciding whether to come through it, and she had a patient on the bed in front of her who was showing the early signs of a post-operative complication that would become critical if nobody stayed in this room for the next 7 minutes. She could not be in both places at once. She reached for the emergency call button above Sloane's bed and held it down. 3 long presses, which was not the standard protocol, which was the specific signal pattern she had learned in a building on the other side of the world to indicate a breach requiring immediate response. And then she picked up the ultrasound probe she had set down, because it was the heaviest thing within arm's reach, and she turned to face the secondary door. The handle moved. The door opened 2 inches. And Emily Carter, who everyone at Calloway General had spent 14 months deciding was just a nurse, took a breath and stepped toward it. She went to the West Wing patient first. This was not avoidance. It was the only correct order of operations, because the patient on the West Wing had a blood pressure reading that needed a human assessment and not a monitor assumption, and the thing Kreft had just told her was not going anywhere in the next 4 minutes. Emily had learned, in rooms considerably more urgent than this one, that the way to handle information you couldn't yet act on was to file it cleanly and continue the work in front of you. Compartmentalization was not denial. It was resource management. The West Wing patient was a 63-year-old woman named Mrs. Aldridge, who had come in 2 days ago with a hip fracture and was now running a low-grade fever and a blood pressure that had drifted 15 points below her baseline. Emily did a full bedside assessment, lung sounds, skin temperature, urine output from the catheter bag, wound site, and found the beginning of what was probably a urinary tract infection, which was common enough in post-surgical hip patients, and was caught early enough to be managed simply. She updated the chart, flagged it for the attending, and ordered the urinalysis through the proper channel. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Then she went back to the nursing station, where Kreft was waiting with the specific patience of someone who had learned not to push people in the middle of a task. "Tell me what the file says," Emily said. Kreft pulled a chair to the side of the station, away from the main traffic line, and Emily sat down across from her. The station was busy enough that no one was paying attention to 2 people having a quiet conversation at the edge of it, which was exactly the kind of cover that busy hospitals provided without anyone planning it. "Your operational name was Hargrove," Kreft said. "The file uses that designation throughout. It covers a period of approximately 4 years, 3 overseas deployments and 1 domestic operation, all conducted under a classified medical support mandate that was attached to a special operations task force. Your unit designation is redacted in the version we have, but the operational record is detailed." She paused. "You saved 11 people in documented field medical actions. You were extracted from the last operation under circumstances that the file describes as mission-critical protective transfer, which is federal language for someone decided I knew too much to leave in the field," Emily said. "That's one reading." "That's the accurate reading." Kreft looked at her without contradiction. "The extraction placed you under a protected civilian identity. Emily Carter, nursing credentials, Drenwick placement. The file was sealed at the federal level by an authorization that traces back 4 years later to Malcolm Raines's office." She stopped. "Not the office that sealed the file originally. Raines's office added a secondary seal 16 months ago, which means—" "He found me 16 months ago," Emily said. The number sat between them for a moment. 16 months ago. 2 months before she had started at Calloway General, which meant that her placement here, the job posting she had found through what she had believed were clean channels, the interview with Mercer that had felt accidental, the 14 months of deliberately unremarkable work, had not been entirely what she thought it was. He didn't expose you immediately, Kreft said. He sat on the information. The communication thread with Hale goes back 11 weeks, which means he waited 5 months after placing the secondary seal before he made contact with anyone inside the hospital. He was watching, Emily said, deciding whether I was useful, or deciding whether you were a threat. Kreft folded her hands on the table. The communication thread doesn't make his reasoning fully explicit, but there's a recurring subject line in the messages to Hale. We've been running it through decryption, and it refers to something called the Calloway variable. That phrase appears 14 times across the 11-week thread. Emily looked at her. You're the variable, Kreft said. The operation was planned around your presence here. Hale was recruited because Raines needed an inside source at this specific hospital, not just because Calloway General was the nearest Level I trauma center to the convoy route, but because you were here, and because whatever is in that sealed file, Raines believed it gave him leverage. The nursing station around them continued its ordinary morning rhythm. Dale was on the phone at the far end. 2-day shift nurses were updating charts. The overhead intercom called a code blue on the 3rd floor. Cardiac event, unrelated, the hospital's own machinery grinding on. Emily thought about leverage. She thought about the specific architecture of what Raines had built. The convoy route exposed, Sloan targeted, Hale placed inside the hospital, the secondary team deployed. All of it layered, all of it contingent, all of it pointing here. To this floor, this nursing station, this particular woman in oversized scrubs with a taped shoulder and a name that was not the name on her sealed file. He wanted Sloan dead, Emily said, but he also wanted something from me. That's what we think, Kreft said. We don't know yet what. The file, Emily said. Whatever's in the sealed file, the full version, the unredacted one. That's what he was protecting. He needed Sloan dead because she had access to it, and he needed me. She stopped. We think he needed you discredited, Kreft said quietly, or disappeared. The communication thread has one unencrypted line, possibly a mistake, possibly intentional, that reads, "The Hargrove problem resolves when Sloan does." The Hargrove problem. Emily sat with that for a moment. 14 months of being the clumsy nurse, the dropped charts, the crooked badge, the too big scrubs, the careful performance of incompetence. She had built all of it herself, as cover, as protection. And Raines had been watching it from a distance for 16 months, through Hale's eyes for 11 weeks, waiting for the right moment to use her as a piece in a game she hadn't known she was in. "Where's Raines now?" she said. "Federal holding. He lawyered up within 4 minutes of being processed, which means we have a window before his legal team starts restricting our access. Our team is moving on the communication thread as fast as we can." Kreft looked at her steadily. "And there's a federal oversight committee that has been notified of the sealed file situation. They'll be here by this afternoon." "To do what?" "To determine what happens to the file. And to you." Emily absorbed this. "Am I being detained?" "No. You're a material witness to a federal operation and an asset in an active investigation. But your situation is complicated. The protective identity was established by a federal order that Raines corrupted. The legal status of that identity going forward is something that the committee will need to determine." Kreft paused. "I want to be honest with you. I don't know exactly what that means for your nursing position here, or for your name, or for any of the infrastructure you've built in the last 14 months. Emily looked at the nursing station, at the chart she had been working on, at Dale still on his phone, at the East Wing corridor where Sloan was alive in the ICU. And Hale was somewhere in federal custody, and the morning shift was running its ordinary course. "I need to finish my rounds," she said. Kreft nodded once. "I'll be in the conference room." Emily stood up. Her shoulder said what it always said now, which she had stopped hearing as pain and started hearing as information, the body's ongoing clinical report on its own condition. She adjusted her arm and went back to work. The Federal Oversight Committee arrived at 1:47 in the afternoon, not by this afternoon, which told Emily something about the priority level of what was in that sealed file. There were 4 of them, 2 in federal identification lanyards she didn't recognize, 1 in a military uniform with a rank insignia that made Dale Briggs stare openly when they came through the main entrance, and one woman in civilian clothes who carried a leather portfolio and said nothing to anyone but whose presence seemed to organize the other three in a way that suggested she was the actual authority in the group. Mercer met them at the entrance. Emily watched from the nursing station. Mercer spoke to the woman with the portfolio for approximately 90 seconds, then turned and looked at Emily across the length of the corridor. She went to them. The woman's name was Audrey Taft. She was from an office whose full name Emily was not given, only the acronym, which she recognized from a different chapter of her life, and which told her everything she needed to know about the weight behind this visit. Taft had gray hair cut short, and the kind of stillness that comes from spending a career in rooms where talking too much is a professional liability. "We have the file," Taft said, without preamble. "The full version?" Emily said. "The unredacted version. It was recovered from Raines's secure archive approximately 2 hours ago, along with documentation of the secondary seal he placed 16 months ago." Taft paused. The secondary seal was unauthorized. Raines did not have the clearance level required to place a secondary seal on a protected identity file. What he did was illegal, and it allowed him to use information that should have been compartmented as operational leverage in a criminal conspiracy. Emily said nothing. "Your record," Taft said, "is intact. Every commendation, every operational citation, every documented field action from the period covered by the Hargrove designation. All of it is in the file and all of it is clean." She looked at Emily with the measured, careful attention of someone who had read something thorough. "You should know that the people who placed you under the protective identity 4 years ago did not intend for you to disappear permanently. The intent was an 18-month protection period while a related prosecution was completed. Something went wrong with the transition protocols, and the file was absorbed into a compartment that was not properly monitored." She paused. "Raines found it because he was looking for it specifically. He had a reason to look." "What reason?" Emily said. "You witnessed something on your last deployment, something that connected to a procurement fraud operation that Raines had been running through a defense contracting network for 6 years. You filed an incident report. The report was classified before it reached the proper investigative authority, and then the classification was used to bury it." Taft's voice remained even throughout this. "Raines has been managing that exposure for 4 years. When he found your file 16 months ago, he understood that if your identity was ever restored and your operational record fully reviewed, the incident report would surface." The corridor was quiet. Mercer was beside her, not speaking, which was the right choice. "So the convoy attack," Emily said. Director Sloan's office had initiated a review of classified incident reports from that operational period," Taft said. She didn't know what she was looking for specifically, but she was methodical. Raines knew she would find it eventually. Taft looked at her. "Killing Sloan would have closed one exposure. Discrediting or eliminating you would have closed the other." Emily thought about the Calloway variable, 14 times in 11 weeks. She thought about Hale, watching her drop charts and calling her slow and telling her to fix her badge. She thought about whether he had known what she was, or only that she was something Raines needed managed. She thought about the difference between those two things and whether it mattered. "The incident report," she said. "Does Sloan's office have it now?" "It was recovered with the file, yes." "Then the prosecution is already in motion," Taft said. "Raines will face federal charges on multiple counts. The procurement fraud case, the conspiracy to commit murder, the unauthorized classification manipulation, the operation against the convoy." She paused. "Hale will face federal charges for his role in the conspiracy, accessory counts, and the violations of his medical authority obligations. His license will be suspended pending investigation, effective this morning." Emily heard that. She let it settle. "There's one more thing," Taft said. She opened the leather portfolio. Inside was a document, 1 page, formal header, multiple signatures at the bottom. She held it out. "This is a formal restoration order for your operational record and your legal identity. Emily Carter remains valid as a legal name. It was properly documented, and you've built a life under it, and there's no requirement to change it. But the Hargrove record is no longer sealed. Your service record, your commendations, your operational citations, they exist. Officially, completely." Emily took the document. She looked at it for a moment. The language was formal and dense and bureaucratic and completely unremarkable in its appearance, for something that represented 4 years of being nobody in particular. She folded it once and put it in her scrub pocket, next to the trauma shears. "Thank you," she said. Taft nodded. "Thank you," she said back, and the specific weight she gave the two words was not performative. Hale was formally arrested at 2:23 in the afternoon. Emily was not present for it. She was in room 212 monitoring Mrs. Aldridge's potassium levels when it happened, and she heard about it from Dale, who came to the doorway of the room with the specific expression of someone who had just witnessed something that was going to require significant time to process. "They just walked Hale out," Dale said. "I know," she said, "in handcuffs." Dale, I'm in the middle of something." He stood there for another 2 seconds, processing. "Emily, did you know? This whole time, did you—" "I didn't know about Hale specifically," she said. "Not until last night." "But you knew about you." She checked the potassium reading and updated the chart note. "I knew some things about me. Give me 5 minutes with this patient." He went back to the station. She finished with Mrs. Aldridge, answered the older woman's questions about why there were so many people in suits in the hallway, and told her it was an administrative matter, which was technically true. The news of Hale's arrest moved through the hospital the way news always moved through hospitals, fast, distorted by the game of telephone quality of information, passing through multiple tired people in close quarters, arriving at the nursing station already wearing 3 different versions of itself. Emily heard 2 of those versions while charting. She corrected neither. The accurate version would exist in the official record, which was the only place accuracy was durable. What she did notice, over the next hour, was the specific quality of the silence around her. It was different from the silence she had occupied for 14 months. That silence had been the silence of irrelevance, the particular ambient invisibility of someone who has been assessed and found beneath notice. This silence was something else. It was the silence of people resorting information they thought they had understood. She could see it in the way the day nurses moved around her, not avoiding, just recalibrating. The way the day residents looked at her when they passed the station. The way the facility's staff, who had always been friendly but breezy, were suddenly slightly more deliberate in their greetings. She did not find this comfortable. She had not built her life around being looked at, but she understood it was different from being overlooked, and she understood the difference mattered. At 3:45, Dr. Okafor appeared at the nursing station. He had been in surgery for most of the afternoon, a scheduled procedure completely unrelated to the night's events, and he had the specific washed-out quality of a man who had done 2 emergency surgeries before dawn and then a full scheduled case after noon on the same day. "Sloane's numbers look good," he said. "I know. I checked it too." "I know you checked too," Dale told me. He looked at her shoulder. "You need imaging." "I'm finishing my shift." "Emily." He said her name with the quiet authority of a man who did not spend it often. "You have a partial separation in that shoulder. I can tell from the way you've been holding your arm since 6 this morning. You need imaging, and you need it before the soft tissue swells any further." She looked at her arm. She looked at the chart in front of her. "After rounds," she said. He made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite frustration. "I'll have radiology ready in 40 minutes. You finish rounds, you go directly there." He paused. "That is not a request." "Understood," she said. He nodded once and left. She went back to her rounds. She was in the East Wing at 4:08, doing a routine post-op check on a patient named Gordon who had had a gallbladder removal the previous morning and was doing well enough to be transferred to the step-down unit in the next 12 hours when Kreft appeared in the doorway. Something in Kreft's posture told her immediately that this was not a procedural update. "Outside," Kreft said. Emily told Gordon she'd be back in 5 minutes. She stepped into the hallway. "Patterson is talking," Kreft said. "The facilities coordinator. He decided that the benefits of cooperation outweighed the alternative, and he has been talking for the last 2 hours." She paused. "He's given us the full operational picture of how Rains managed the hospital inside network. And there's a component we didn't have before." Emily waited. "There was a second contact inside the hospital," Kreft said. "Not Hale, not Patterson. A third person who was recruited separately, through a different channel, approximately 9 months ago. Patterson doesn't know who it is. He only knows that Rains referred to this contact as the backup position. Someone who wasn't connected to Hale's thread, who would have independent access to specific hospital systems, and who was activated only if the primary operation failed." Emily looked at her. The primary operation has failed, Kreft said. Hale is in custody. Patterson is in custody. Rains is in custody. Which means the backup position is still active, Emily said, and we don't know who it is. Emily thought about the hospital around her. 400 beds, 230 staff on any given shift, administrative personnel, contracted services, vendors, overnight staff, who overlapped with day staff by 90 minutes in both directions. She thought about what independent access to specific hospital systems would look like. Not security schematics, that was Patterson. Not surgical scheduling, that was Hale. Something else. Something that would be useful as a backup position. What systems? She said. We don't know specifically. Patterson didn't say what the backup contact's access was? He said Rains described it as medical record access and patient location. Medical record access and patient location. Emily's mind moved through the list of people with that specific combination of access. Physicians had it, but used the physician portal, which had a separate log. Nurses had it through the nursing documentation system, which was also logged. Administrative staff had limited versions. Billing had billing-level access. There was one category that had broad, system-wide access to both medical records and patient location data, physical location, room assignment, transfer status, without the logging requirements that applied to clinical staff. Health Information Management, Emily said. The HIM department. They have records access and they have the patient census system for tracking location. Kreft looked at her. How many people are in that department? 7 on the main shift, 2 on the evening rotation. We need names and we need the access logs from the HIM system pulled independently, same way we pulled the security logs. The HIM system is separate from the main network. It has its own server access. Emily paused. Room B11, sub-basement, next to B7 where your team pulled the security logs. Kreft was already on her radio. Emily did not wait for the conversation to conclude. She went back to Gordon's room, completed the post-op assessment, updated the chart, answered his question about whether the step-down unit had a television with more than 4 channels, and told him she genuinely did not know. Then she went back to the hallway and stood for a moment. The hospital was moving into the late afternoon rhythm. Shift overlap beginning, day staff finishing documentation, evening staff arriving with the slightly braced quality of people preparing to absorb whatever the day had left behind. The federal presence was lighter than it had been at 6 in the morning, but it was still there. 2 agents in the lobby, 1 at the ICU entrance, Kreft's team in the conference room. The armored vehicles in the parking structure had been reduced to 2. From a distance, from the outside, it might have looked like things were settling. They were not settling. There was still someone in this building who had been placed here as a backup position by the same man who had tried to kill Rebecca Sloan and eliminate Emily Carter and bury a procurement fraud investigation under 4 years of sealed files and corrupted clearances. And that person knew the primary operation had failed, which meant they were making a decision right now. Emily thought about what she would do in that position. If she were the backup, the unknown third contact, watching Hale get walked out in handcuffs and knowing that Patterson was talking and that federal agents had been in the sub-basement pulling server logs for the last 8 hours. She would do one of 2 things. She would run, or she would finish what she had been activated to finish. The backup contact had medical record access and patient location data. Sloan was in the ICU. Her location was in the patient census system. Emily was already moving before she had finished the thought, and she was moving fast enough that 2 nurses at the station looked up when she passed, and she did not explain and did not slow down, because the ICU was at the far end of the east wing, and it took 45 seconds at a walk, and she was not walking. She came through the ICU outer door and scanned the unit. The federal agent at the entrance, a woman she recognized from Kreft's team, was at her post. The ICU nurses were at the station. The unit looked normal. She looked at Sloan's bay. The curtain was partially drawn. It had not been partially drawn when she checked at 2 o'clock. She crossed the unit in 8 steps and pulled the curtain back. A man she recognized. Not from the federal team, not from the clinical staff, from the hospital's own administrative roster. His name was Carver, mid-30s, worked in health information management, had been at Calloway General for 9 months. He was standing at Sloan's bedside with his back to the curtain and one hand at the IV line, not adjusting it, reaching into his jacket pocket with the other hand. Emily grabbed his wrist before the hand came out of the pocket. What happened in the next 6 seconds was not clean. Carver was larger than Patterson and less surprised than the men in the stairwell had been, and Emily's left shoulder was not what it had been at midnight, and the IV stand went over with a crash that brought every head in the ICU up at once, and the federal agent at the entrance was moving before the stand finished falling. Carver hit the floor. Emily's shoulder screamed and she held the position anyway, and when the federal agent reached them and took over, she stepped back and held her left arm against her body and looked at Sloane's IV line. A syringe, still capped. Carver had not gotten it out of his pocket before she reached him. She told the agent. The agent secured the syringe and called it in, and the room was suddenly full of voices and radio traffic and the specific urgent efficiency of a threat that had been stopped, but only just. Emily stood at the foot of Sloane's bed and looked at the patient's vitals, which had not changed. The crash of the IV stand had not disturbed her sedation, her readings were holding, she was unaware of any of this. Emily's shoulder was producing a level of pain that her background noise categorization system was no longer able to process as background noise. Kreft appeared in the ICU doorway at a speed that suggested she had been somewhere close when the radio call went out. She looked at Carver on the floor, at the secured syringe, at Emily standing at the foot of the bed. "Third contact," Emily said. "Yes," Kreft said. He was in the HIM system. He knew her room. "Yes." "The syringe, our lab will process it." Kreft looked at her. "Emily, your arm." "I know." "You need—" "I know." Emily looked at Sloane one more time. The readings were fine. The sedation was holding. Okafor's repair was holding. The patient who had come through the doors barely alive last night was breathing steadily in the quiet of the ICU. "She's going to wake up," Emily said, to no one specifically. Then she turned and walked toward the door, because Okafor had told her radiology would be ready in 40 minutes, and it had been 53 minutes, and her shoulder needed imaging, and that was the next correct order of operations. She was in the hallway outside the ICU, moving toward the imaging wing, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. She answered. "It's Weston," the voice said. She kept walking. "I know. I've been getting reports from the federal team you had a busy night and morning." "The file," Weston said. "Emily, they're going to restore your record, your full record, everything." "I know, Taft's committee was here." A pause. Not the kind of pause that meant uncertainty, the kind that meant someone was choosing the next thing carefully. "There's something they don't have yet," Weston said. "Something that wasn't in Raines's archive. I have it. I've had it for 4 years." Emily stopped walking. The corridor was empty in both directions. "What is it?" she said. "The incident report you filed," Weston said. "The original. Not the classified version that Raines buried. The one you filed before anyone got to it." A beat. "I pulled it out of the system before the classification went through. I've been sitting on it for 4 years because I didn't know if I could trust the chain of custody above me." Emily stood very still. "The names in that report," Weston said. "Emily, there are names in there that are not in the version Taft's committee recovered, people who were involved in the fraud network who Raines protected when he buried the report." He paused. "People who are still in their positions." She looked at the corridor wall, at the flat, directionless quality of the afternoon light through the high windows. "How many names?" she said. 4, Weston said. "One of them you'll recognize. One of them has been in the news this week because of something completely unrelated, and one of them—" He stopped. "Weston, one of them is on the Federal Oversight Committee that came to see you today." "Which one?" Emily said. Not a question. The inflection was flat, operational, the voice she used when she needed an answer immediately and could not spend the syllables on anything decorative. "Taft's deputy," Weston said. "Man named Garrett Hollis. He came with the committee, but he wasn't introduced by name. I'm getting this from the federal team's movement log. He was in the building for 2 hours this afternoon." Emily ran the afternoon backward in her mind. The 4-person committee. Taft with the portfolio. The military uniform. 2 federal ID lanyards. She had focused on Taft because Taft was clearly the authority. The others she had registered as peripheral. One of them had spent 2 hours in a building that contained the only surviving witness to his name in an incident report he had spent 4 years assuming was buried. Is he still in the building? she said. Unknown. That's why I'm calling you and not waiting for the federal team to work through channels. Because working through channels is exactly how Rains managed this for 4 years. She understood that. She also understood that she was standing in a hospital corridor with a partially separated shoulder, 14 hours into what had started as a Tuesday shift, and that the next correct move was not one she could make alone. I need you to send me what you have, she said. The original report. Everything. Already done. It's in your secure account. The one from before. She hadn't accessed that account in 4 years. She still remembered the credentials because she remembered everything she had needed to remember for operational purposes, and that information lived in a part of her memory that did not seem to decay the way other things did. Give me 20 minutes, she said. She hung up. She stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds, which was long enough to make the decision and short enough that it didn't become hesitation. Then she walked, not toward radiology, not toward the nursing station, but toward Mercer's conference room, where Kreft's team had been working since 7 in the morning. Kreft was at the table with 2 analysts when Emily came through the door. The room smelled like the end of a very long operational day. Cold coffee, warm electronics, the specific staleness of air that had been recirculated through too many stressed people for too many hours. I need your secure line, Emily said. Not the hospital network, your federal line. Kreft looked at her. She had learned over the course of the last 14 hours to read Emily's registers, and what she was reading now made her stand up. What happened? Emily told her. Concise, sequenced, no editorializing. Weston, the original incident report, the 4 names, Hollis. When she finished, Kreft had already turned to the nearest analyst. Garrett Hollis, pull everything we have on his committee assignment and his movement today. She turned back to Emily. The report? You have access to it? In 20 minutes. Can you get it now? I need a device that isn't on the hospital network. Kreft pulled her own tablet from the table and held it out. Emily took it and sat down and accessed the account that she had not touched in 4 years, and it was still there. The credentials still worked. The account still existed in whatever archived state federal protective identity systems maintained for their dormant files, and the document Weston had sent was at the top of the queue. She opened it. It was 11 pages. Single-spaced. Her own writing 4 years ago, in the precise and unemotional style she had been trained to use for incident documentation. Dates, locations, observed actions, identified individuals, supporting evidence. She had written it in 4 hours in a forward operating location on the last night before her extraction because she had understood that if she didn't write it that night, there was a significant probability she would not be in a position to write it later. 4 names in the body of the report. 2 she recognized from Rains's network as it had been revealed through the night's investigation. 1 she did not know, and 1, listed in Section 7, in connection with a specific procurement authorization that had moved $12 million through a defense contractor shell structure, listed as Garrett A. Hollis, then serving as a senior contracting oversight official, now serving as a federal deputy committee director. She passed the tablet to Kreft. Kreft read. She was a fast reader, and she read with the focused silence of someone who was simultaneously processing content and implication. When she finished, she set the tablet on the table and looked at the wall for approximately 3 seconds. He was in this building, Kreft said, for 2 hours. He had access to the committee's briefing materials, which included the status of the file restoration, Emily said. He would have known the version Taft's committee recovered didn't have his name in it. He would have thought he was still protected. But if this report surfaces, he's in the original incident documentation, connected to the same procurement fraud network as Rains. 4 years of exposure that he thought was buried. Emily looked at her. He's not going to wait for us to find him. If he's still in the building, Kreft was already on her radio. Hollis was in the parking structure, not running. That was the thing that surprised Emily when Kreft's team located him 6 minutes later on the structure's security feed. He was sitting in the back of the committee's government vehicle on level 2, on his phone, with the specific stillness of a man who had decided that composure was the last asset he had and was spending it carefully. He was still on the phone when 2 federal agents opened the vehicle door. Emily was not in the parking structure for any of this. She was in the corridor outside the ICU, which was where she had been when Kreft's team moved. Because the ICU was where her patient was, and the parking structure was where the federal team was, and she had understood, at some point in the last 14 hours, that the line between those two things was the line she had actually been defending all along. Not the operation, not the investigation. The patient in the bed who was alive because someone had stayed in the room. She heard the confirmation come through on Kreft's radio, which Kreft had left with her, a gesture that Emily chose to read as practical rather than symbolic, though it was probably both, at 5:14 in the afternoon. "Hollis is secured," the agent's voice said. "He's requesting counsel." Emily held the radio for a moment. Then she went into the ICU to check on Sloan. What? Radiology cleared her shoulder at 6:02, partial separation of the acromioclavicular joint, which was exactly what she had assessed it as. And the radiologist, a careful man named Dr. Pham, who had never spoken more than 12 words to her in 14 months, and now seemed uncertain of the appropriate register for the current situation, told her she needed a sling for 3 weeks and no heavy lifting and a follow-up in 10 days. She told him she understood. He told her she should have come in 6 hours ago. She told him she agreed and that she had been busy, which was the most compressed summary of the day she could manage. She put on the sling. It was strange wearing it. The shoulder had been background noise for so long that making it visible, acknowledging it formally, with medical hardware, felt like a different kind of admission than the one she had been making all day. The body keeping its own record of what the night had cost. She went back to the floor. Dale was at the station when she came back, and he looked at the sling and looked at her face and made the expression of a man who had approximately 40 questions and understood that the moment for most of them had passed. "Hollis?" he said. Apparently the name had moved through the hospital with the same speed as everything else. "Federal custody," she said. "How many people does that make?" She thought about it. Rains, Hale, Patterson, Carver, the 3 intruders from the stairwell and the ICU hallway. Hollis. The additional names in the original incident report that the federal team was now working through. "Enough," she said. Dale nodded slowly. He had the look of a man who was recalibrating something significant. "For what it's worth," he said, and then he stopped, and she could see him trying to find words that were proportionate to what he was trying to say, and finding that nothing quite fit. "It's fine, Dale," she said. "It's not," he said. "I knew Hale treated you badly, and I didn't. You did your job. He was your department chief. That's not Dale." She said his name with the same quiet weight she used when she needed someone to stop. "I'm not carrying that for you. That's yours. But I'm also not interested in the accounting right now." She picked up the chart she had left on the station an hour ago. "I need to finish my documentation before the shift ends." He stood there for another moment. Then he went back to his clipboard. She finished the documentation. Mercer found her at 7:30, when the evening shift was fully transitioned and the day staff had mostly gone home and the hospital had settled into the specific quietness of early evening. He came to the nursing station without his coat, which was unusual. She had never seen him on the floor without his coat, and he looked like a man who had spent the day doing things that were outside his job description and was processing the gap between what the job description said and what the day had actually required. "Come to my office," he said. "When you have 5 minutes." "I have 5 minutes now." They went. His office was the same as it always was. Neat, functional, the framed degrees on the wall that she had memorized in the first week and not looked at since. He sat behind his desk and she sat across from it, and between them was the specific air of a conversation that both of them knew was significant, and neither of them wanted to make larger than it needed to be. "Taft's committee will complete its formal review within the week," Mercer said. "The hospital's board has been notified of Hale's situation. His suspension is effective immediately, and his position is vacant." He looked at her steadily. "I want to offer you a role." She waited. "Trauma team lead," he said. "It's a formal position with clinical authority, appropriate compensation, and the title that reflects what you have actually been doing here for 14 months without the title or the pay." He paused. "I should have seen it sooner. I want to be honest about that." "You saw it when it mattered," she said. "That's generous." "It's accurate." She looked at him. "You backed me in the trauma bay on day 1. You prepped this hospital on a 40-minute call from a nurse you had no particular reason to trust. And when everything started moving, you moved with it." She paused. "That's not nothing, Dr. Mercer." He absorbed this. Will you take the position? She thought about it for a genuine moment, not performing consideration, but actually sitting with it. Trauma team lead at Calloway General. The role she had been functionally filling without the authority, without the pay, without the standing to do it openly. The role that would require her to stop making herself small, to stop apologizing for things that weren't her fault, to stop wearing scrubs 2 sizes too big as a form of camouflage. She thought about what Taft had said. The record is intact. The commendations, the citations, the documented field actions. Existing now, officially, in the complete and unredacted form that 4 years of sealed files and corrupted clearances had kept invisible. She thought about the 14-year-old baseball fan who would probably be discharged tomorrow and who had asked her, during one of her rounds, whether she liked working here. She had said yes, automatically, and then she had stayed with the question for a moment and understood that the automatic answer was also the true one, which was something she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge before. Yes, she said. Mercer nodded. He had the look of someone who had been holding that answer as a hope rather than an assumption, and was relieved to have it confirmed. There will be a formal staff meeting, he said. The board wants to address what happened. I'd like you to be present. When? Day after tomorrow. I didn't want to do it tomorrow. I want you to have a day. She almost said she didn't need a day. She stopped herself because it would have been the old reflex, the one that said taking space for herself was an imposition. All right, she said instead. She stood. She adjusted the sling. She looked at him across the desk. For what it's worth, she said, and meant it specifically. This is a good hospital. Underneath all of it, the staff is good, the work is real. She paused. I didn't choose it by accident. Mercer looked at her. Neither did I, he said. When I hired you. She went back to the floor, shammed. Sloane woke up on the 3rd day. Emily was on shift. She had taken 2 of the 3 days Mercer had given her and spent the 3rd one back at work, because rest had never been something she was particularly talented at, and the shoulder was in its sling, and there was no heavy lifting required for most of what she needed to do. She was at the ICU station updating a chart when the monitor in Sloane's bay shifted pattern, and she was at the bedside in 40 seconds. Sloane's eyes were open. Not fully. The particular half-mast of someone returning from deep sedation, moving through layers of consciousness, like a diver ascending slowly, aware of light and presence before anything more specific. She was on reduced sedation by then, Okafor's order from the previous afternoon, and her vitals had been strong enough for the last 18 hours that this had been the expected direction. Emily stood at the bedside and said her name quietly, once. Sloane's eyes moved toward her. You're at Calloway General Medical Center, Emily said. In Drenwick. You're safe. You've had 2 surgeries and you've been sedated for approximately 60 hours. My name is Emily Carter. I'm your nurse. Sloane looked at her. The eyes were not fully tracking yet, but there was something conscious behind them, something that was assembling itself from the available information. Water, Sloane said. Or tried to. The word came out compressed and rough from the intubation that had been removed the previous day. Emily got the ice chips. She helped Sloane manage them, and when Sloane had processed the first few and the eyes had sharpened another degree, Emily said, I'm going to call Dr. Okafor. He'll want to assess you. Wait, Sloane said, clearer this time. Emily waited. Sloane looked at her with the specific attention of someone who was working through a significant information deficit and assembling a picture from the pieces available. The ICU, the monitors, the sling on the nurse's arm, the quality of the quiet in the room. What happened? Sloane said. It was also not a question. A great deal, Emily said. Most of it has been handled. Director Raines is in federal custody. The people who attacked your convoy are in federal custody. The inside network at this hospital has been dismantled. She paused. There will be a full briefing from the federal team when you're ready. I'm giving you the summary. Sloane looked at her for a long moment. You're the one, Sloane said. The nurse. Yes. They told me, before I went under, someone said a nurse was... She stopped, reassembled. You kept me alive. I did my job, Emily said. Sloane's eyes did something that was working toward an expression her face was not yet fully coordinated enough to complete. I know what your job actually is, she said. Taft briefed me this morning. The file. Emily said nothing. Hargrove, Sloane said. Carter, Emily said. That's the name I use. Sloane looked at her. Carter, she said, accepting this. I want you to know. The review my office started. The classified incident reports. I was looking specifically because someone told me there was a buried report that connected to the fraud network. I didn't know it connected to you. She paused. I'm sorry it took this long. Emily thought about 4 years. About Drenwick, about gas station coffee, and 2 big scrubs, and dropped charts and a badge that was never actually crooked. About the specific labor of making yourself invisible in a world that was not designed to see you even when you were standing directly in front of it. You're awake, Emily said. That's what matters now. She called Okafor. The staff meeting happened on the 4th day, in the main conference room on the administrative floor. It was not a small meeting. Mercer had opened it to the full clinical staff, not just department heads, which meant the room was at capacity, and there were people standing along the walls. Emily arrived 3 minutes early and stood near the back, which was where she was comfortable, and several people registered her presence, and several people looked at the sling, and several people looked at her face, and then at the room, and she could see the recalibration happening in real time, the shuffling of a mental file that had been labeled one thing for 14 months and was now being relabeled. Mercer opened the meeting without ceremony. He was not a ceremonial man. He said what had happened in the clear and structured way of someone who had organized the information carefully and was delivering it without dramatics, because the information itself was dramatic enough. The convoy, the attack, the federal operation, the inside network, the arrests. Hale's suspension and pending prosecution, Patterson's cooperation agreement, Carver's arrest, Hollis's arrest, Raines, and Emily. He said her name and said what she had done, item by item, in the same clear and structured way. The tension pneumothorax call on Gary Mullen, the pre-convoy preparation, the stairwell, the ICU door, the marina, the original incident report and the names it contained. He said all of it without embellishment, because it did not need embellishment, and the room was very quiet. At the end he said, I'm formally announcing Emily Carter's appointment as trauma team lead, effective immediately. Her compensation and clinical authority will be adjusted to match the role. This appointment is not a courtesy. It reflects what has been true for 14 months and what will continue to be true. The room was quiet for 2 more seconds. Then Okafor, from his position near the front, started clapping. It was not the automatic applause of people who have been prompted. It was the specific, deliberate applause of a man who had made a decision about what this moment deserved and was executing it. 2 other people joined before the echo died. Then more. Then the room, with the particular momentum of a tide that had been building pressure and finally found the direction it wanted to go. Emily stood at the back and let it happen. She did not smile in the performed way of someone receiving something they had always wanted. She did not deflect it or dismiss it. She stood with it, which was the hardest thing, which was the thing she had not known how to do for a very long time. To stand in the space that was rightfully hers without making herself smaller to fit someone else's idea of what she should occupy. Her shoulder hurt. She was tired in a way that went below the physical into something older and deeper. And she was standing in a room full of people who were finally seeing what had been in front of them the whole time. And it did not fix the 14 months, and it did not fix the 4 years, and it did not fix anything that had been wrong. But it was real, and it was hers, and she was not going to minimize it. She was done minimizing things. 2 weeks later, she got a card in the mail, not an email. An actual card, handwritten, on plain cream stock. The handwriting was careful and slightly uneven on the right side, which was consistent with someone managing a recovering shoulder injury on their dominant arm. Ms. Carter, I have spent a considerable amount of my career in rooms where people decide who gets taken seriously and who doesn't. I thought I was good at reading those rooms. I was wrong about one of them. I'm glad I was wrong. R. Sloane. Emily read it twice. She put it on the windowsill in her apartment, next to the one personal photograph she kept, taken years ago, in a location she didn't identify to anyone who asked, of a group of people in unremarkable field gear standing in unremarkable terrain with the specific, tired satisfaction of people who had just finished something difficult and were still there. She looked at it for a moment. Then she got her bag and went to work. The morning shift at Calloway General began the same way it always began. The staff entrance, the badge, Dale at the desk with his clipboard. But the badge was straight now, and the scrubs were the right size, and when Dale said Carter, it was with the particular tone of someone who had rearranged a significant amount of their internal furniture and was still finding where everything went. "Trauma consult at 7:30, he said. "Okafor wants you in on the pre-op review." "I'll be there." "And rooms 408 and 412 both need morning assessments before rounds." "I know." She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "I'll start with 408. She moved through the nursing station with the same efficiency she had always moved with, which looked from the outside almost identical to how it had looked 14 months ago. Same pace, same focus, same habit of knowing where everything was before she needed it. The external rhythm of the work had not changed. What had changed was what she was no longer doing while she did it. She was no longer monitoring herself for the appearance of not threatening anyone. She was no longer translating her own competence into a smaller language that made it easier for certain people to be comfortable around her. She was no longer apologizing for the space she occupied or calculating how much less of herself she could become before she disappeared entirely. Those were exhausting things to do alongside actual work. She had not understood how exhausting until she stopped. Room 408 had a 68-year-old patient named Mr. Vandermeer who had come in with a broken wrist and a secondary finding that nobody had fully explained to him yet, and he was anxious and slightly combative in the way of someone who was more frightened than they were angry. Emily sat with him for 9 minutes, not because she had 9 minutes, but because 9 minutes was what it took, and explained what she knew in the plain, direct language she used when she wanted someone to actually understand what they were being told rather than simply nodding. He was less frightened when she left, not because she had made things better, because she had made things clear, and clarity was its own form of care. She went to 412. She did her rounds. She was in the trauma bay at 728 for the pre-op review, standing across from Okafor. And when she spoke, he listened the way he had always listened, because Okafor had always listened, which was one of the reasons she had applied to this hospital and stayed. And the review went efficiently, and the surgery was scheduled, and the morning continued its morning. At 9:15, an ambulance bay alert came through for an incoming MVA, vehicle versus pedestrian, mid-block, significant mechanism, unknown injuries. Emily was already moving toward the trauma bay before the overhead announcement finished, pulling on her second glove, and behind her she could hear 2 residents picking up the pace to follow. She pushed through the trauma bay doors. The patient was on the gurney before she reached the threshold. A young woman, mid-20s, conscious and scared, BP and SATs on the paramedic monitor already telling Emily what the next 20 minutes were going to look like. She introduced herself. She started the assessment. She asked specific questions in the specific order and listened to the answers with her full attention, because the woman on the gurney deserved someone's full attention, and that was what Emily was here to give. The work was the same as it had always been. People arrived damaged. Sometimes they were frightened. Sometimes they were angry. Sometimes they had no idea how serious their situation was, and sometimes they understood it with a terrible precision. The monitors tracked, and the medications ran, and the bodies either held or they didn't, and the people doing the work stood in the space between those outcomes and tried to push toward one of them with everything they had. Emily had been doing this work for a long time, in different rooms, different conditions, different corners of a world that had not always been kind to the people passing through it or to her. She had done it in places where the work was invisible, and in places where it was the only visible thing, and in places like this hospital, like this floor, like this bay, where it had been visible all along and she had been the one making herself look small beside it. She understood now that she had done that to herself as much as anyone had done it to her. That was the harder accounting. The people who had dismissed her, Hale, his particular flavor of contempt, the weight of a career spent deciding who deserved to be taken seriously and drawing those lines in places that served him. Those people had consequences waiting for them in federal courtrooms and medical board hearings, and the specific permanent record of what they had chosen to do with authority. That was real, and it was right, and it was finished. But the part of herself she had hidden, not just from them, but from everyone. From the morning shift and the evening rounds, and the 14-year-old baseball fan and Mrs. Aldridge's potassium and Gary Mullen's chest, that part had been her own choice, a reasonable choice, made in the aftermath of a situation that had required disappearing. Not a shameful one, but a choice that had run past its usefulness. She was done disappearing. The young woman on the gurney had a pelvic fracture and a laceration on her left thigh that was going to need surgical attention, and her name was Daniela, and she was scared, and Emily told her clearly what was happening and what was going to happen next, and what Daniela needed to do between now and when she went into the OR. And Daniela nodded and asked one sharp, specific question. Will I be able to walk normally after? That Emily answered honestly, which was, probably yes, but the surgical team would know more once they could see the full picture. Thank you for telling me the truth, Daniela said. That's the job, Emily said. She meant it completely. The trauma bay moved around her and she moved through it, and the work continued because the work always continued, and she was exactly where she had decided to be, doing exactly what she had always been built to do, and there was no longer any performance involved in any of it. The woman who everyone at Calloway General had decided was just a nurse stood in the trauma bay with her badge straight and her sling off. Okafor had cleared her for supervised clinical work 2 days ago, with conditions she followed precisely. And she worked with the full, undivided presence of someone who had stopped spending half their energy on staying invisible. Strength doesn't get smaller because someone refuses to see it. Emily had known this for a long time in a theoretical sense, the way you know something you were told before you understood it. She knew it differently now. She knew it the way you know things that have been tested under actual pressure and held. Not perfectly, not without cost, not without the specific human damage of a shoulder that would ache in cold weather for the rest of her life. And 4 years that she would never entirely stop feeling, but held. She knew it in her hands, which were steady. She knew it in her voice, which carried the weight she chose to put behind it. She knew it in the simple, unadorned fact of still being here. The monitors tracked. The morning continued, and Emily Carter, trauma team lead, Calloway General Medical Center, went to work. Sloan woke up on the 3rd day. Emily was on shift. She had taken 2 of the 3 days Mercer had given her and spent the 3rd one back at work, because rest had never been something she was particularly talented at, and the shoulder was in its sling, and there was no heavy lifting required for most of what she needed to do. She was at the ICU station updating a chart when the monitor in Sloan's bay shifted pattern, and she was at the bedside in 40 seconds. Sloan's eyes were open. Not fully. The particular half-mast of someone returning from deep sedation, moving through layers of consciousness, like a diver ascending slowly, aware of light and presence before anything more specific. She was on reduced sedation by then, Okafor's order from the previous afternoon, and her vitals had been strong enough for the last 18 hours that this had been the expected direction. Emily stood at the bedside and said her name quietly, once. Sloan's eyes moved toward her. You're at Calloway General Medical Center, Emily said. In Drenwick. You're safe. You've had 2 surgeries and you've been sedated for approximately 60 hours. My name is Emily Carter. I'm your nurse. Sloan looked at her. The eyes were not fully tracking yet, but there was something conscious behind them, something that was assembling itself from the available information. Water, Sloan said. Or tried to. The word came out compressed and rough from the intubation that had been removed the previous day. Emily got the ice chips. She helped Sloan manage them, and when Sloan had processed the first few and the eyes had sharpened another degree, Emily said, I'm going to call Dr. Okafor. He'll want to assess you. Wait, Sloan said, clear this time. Emily waited. Sloan looked at her with the specific attention of someone who was working through a significant information deficit and assembling a picture from the pieces available. The ICU. The monitors. The sling on the nurse's arm. The quality of the quiet in the room. What happened? Sloan said. It was also not a question. A great deal, Emily said. Most of it has been handled. Director Raines is in federal custody. The people who attacked your convoy are in federal custody. The inside network at this hospital has been dismantled. She paused. There will be a full briefing from the federal team when you're ready. I'm giving you the summary. Sloan looked at her for a long moment. You're the one, Sloan said. The nurse. Yes. They told me, before I went under, someone said a nurse was... She stopped, reassembled. You kept me alive. I did my job, Emily said. Sloan's eyes did something that was working toward an expression her face was not yet fully coordinated enough to complete. I know what your job actually is, she said. Taft briefed me this morning. The file. Emily said nothing. Hargrove, Sloane said. Carter, Emily said. That's the name I use. Sloane looked at her. Carter, she said, accepting this. I want you to know. The review my office started. The classified incident reports. I was looking specifically because someone told me there was a buried report that connected to the fraud network. I didn't know it connected to you. She paused. I'm sorry it took this long. Emily thought about 4 years. About Drenwick, about gas station coffee, and 2 big scrubs and dropped charts, and a badge that was never actually crooked. About the specific labor of making yourself invisible in a world that was not designed to see you even when you were standing directly in front of it. You're awake, Emily said. That's what matters now. She called Okafor. The staff meeting happened on the 4th day in the main conference room on the administrative floor. It was not a small meeting. Mercer had opened it to the full clinical staff, not just department heads, which meant the room was at capacity and there were people standing along the walls. Emily arrived 3 minutes early and stood near the back, which was where she was comfortable, and several people registered her presence, and several people looked at the sling, and several people looked at her face and then at the room, and she could see the recalibration happening in real time, the shuffling of a mental file that had been labeled one thing for 14 months and was now being relabeled. Mercer opened the meeting without ceremony. He was not a ceremonial man. He said what had happened in the clear and structured way of someone who had organized the information carefully and was delivering it without dramatics, because the information itself was dramatic enough. The convoy, the attack, the federal operation, the inside network, the arrests. Hale's suspension and pending prosecution, Patterson's cooperation agreement, Carver's arrest, Hollis's arrest, Raines, and Emily. He said her name and said what she had done, item by item, in the same clear and structured way. The tension pneumothorax call on Gary Mullen, the pre-convoy preparation, the stairwell, the ICU door, the marina, the original incident report and the names it contained. He said all of it without embellishment, because it did not need embellishment, and the room was very quiet. At the end he said, I'm formally announcing Emily Carter's appointment as trauma team lead, effective immediately. Her compensation and clinical authority will be adjusted to match the role. This appointment is not a courtesy. It reflects what has been true for 14 months and what will continue to be true. The room was quiet for 2 more seconds. Then Okafor, from his position near the front, started clapping. It was not the automatic applause of people who have been prompted. It was the specific, deliberate applause of a man who had made a decision about what this moment deserved and was executing it. 2 other people joined before the echo died. Then more. Then the room, with the particular momentum of a tide that had been building pressure and finally found the direction it wanted to go. Emily stood at the back and let it happen. She did not smile in the performed way of someone receiving something they had always wanted. She did not deflect it or dismiss it. She stood with it, which was the hardest thing, which was the thing she had not known how to do for a very long time, to stand in the space that was rightfully hers without making herself smaller to fit someone else's idea of what she should occupy. Her shoulder hurt. She was tired in a way that went below the physical into something older and deeper. And she was standing in a room full of people who were finally seeing what had been in front of them the whole time. And it did not fix the 14 months, and it did not fix the 4 years, and it did not fix anything that had been wrong. But it was real, and it was hers, and she was not going to minimize it. She was done minimizing things. 2 weeks later, she got a card in the mail, not an email, an actual card, handwritten, on plain cream stock. The handwriting was careful and slightly uneven on the right side, which was consistent with someone managing a recovering shoulder injury on their dominant arm. Ms. Carter, I have spent a considerable amount of my career in rooms where people decide who gets taken seriously and who doesn't. I thought I was good at reading those rooms. I was wrong about one of them. I'm glad I was wrong. R. Sloane. Emily read it twice. She put it on the windowsill in her apartment, next to the one personal photograph she kept, taken years ago, in a location she didn't identify to anyone who asked, of a group of people in unremarkable field gear standing in unremarkable terrain with the specific, tired satisfaction of people who had just finished something difficult and were still there. She looked at it for a moment. Then she got her bag and went to work. The morning shift at Calloway General began the same way it always began. The staff entrance, the badge, Dale at the desk with his clipboard. But the badge was straight now, and the scrubs were the right size. And when Dale said Carter, it was with the particular tone of someone who had rearranged a significant amount of their internal furniture and was still finding where everything went. "Trauma consult at 7:30, he said. "Okafor wants you in on the pre-op review." "I'll be there." "And rooms 408 and 412 both need morning assessments before rounds." "I know." She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "I'll start with 408. She moved through the nursing station with the same efficiency she had always moved with, which looked from the outside almost identical to how it had looked 14 months ago. Same pace, same focus, same habit of knowing where everything was before she needed it. The external rhythm of the work had not changed. What had changed was what she was no longer doing while she did it. She was no longer monitoring herself for the appearance of not threatening anyone. She was no longer translating her own competence into a smaller language that made it easier for certain people to be comfortable around her. She was no longer apologizing for the space she occupied or calculating how much less of herself she could become before she disappeared entirely. Those were exhausting things to do alongside actual work. She had not understood how exhausting until she stopped. Room 408 had a 68-year-old patient named Mr. Vandermeer who had come in with a broken wrist and a secondary finding that nobody had fully explained to him yet, and he was anxious and slightly combative in the way of someone who was more frightened than they were angry. Emily sat with him for 9 minutes, not because she had 9 minutes, but because 9 minutes was what it took, and explained what she knew in the plain, direct language she used when she wanted someone to actually understand what they were being told rather than simply nodding. He was less frightened when she left, not because she had made things better, because she had made things clear, and clarity was its own form of care. She went to 412. She did her rounds. She was in the trauma bay at 7:28 for the pre-op review, standing across from Okafor. And when she spoke, he listened the way he had always listened, because Okafor had always listened, which was one of the reasons she had applied to this hospital and stayed. And the review went efficiently, and the surgery was scheduled, and the morning continued its morning. At 9:15, an ambulance bay alert came through for an incoming MVA, vehicle versus pedestrian, mid-block, significant mechanism, unknown injuries. Emily was already moving toward the trauma bay before the overhead announcement finished, pulling on her second glove, and behind her she could hear 2 residents picking up the pace to follow. She pushed through the trauma bay doors. The patient was on the gurney before she reached the threshold. A young woman, mid-20s, conscious and scared, BP and SATs on the paramedic monitor already telling Emily what the next 20 minutes were going to look like. She introduced herself. She started the assessment. She asked specific questions in the specific order and listened to the answers with her full attention, because the woman on the gurney deserved someone's full attention, and that was what Emily was here to give. The work was the same as it had always been. People arrived damaged. Sometimes they were frightened. Sometimes they were angry. Sometimes they had no idea how serious their situation was, and sometimes they understood it with a terrible precision. The monitors tracked, and the medications ran, and the bodies either held or they didn't, and the people doing the work stood in the space between those outcomes and tried to push toward one of them with everything they had. Emily had been doing this work for a long time, in different rooms, different conditions, different corners of a world that had not always been kind to the people passing through it or to her. She had done it in places where the work was invisible, and in places where it was the only visible thing, and in places like this hospital, like this floor, like this bay, where it had been visible all along, and she had been the one making herself look small beside it. She understood now that she had done that to herself as much as anyone had done it to her. That was the harder accounting. The people who had dismissed her, Hale, his particular flavor of contempt, the weight of a career spent deciding who deserved to be taken seriously and drawing those lines in places that served him. Those people had consequences waiting for them in federal courtrooms and medical board hearings, and the specific permanent record of what they had chosen to do with authority. That was real, and it was right, and it was finished. But the part of herself she had hidden, not just from them, but from everyone, from the morning shift and the evening rounds and the 14-year-old baseball fan and Mrs. Aldridge's potassium and Gary Mullen's chest, that part had been her own choice, a reasonable choice, made in the aftermath of a situation that had required disappearing. Not a shameful one, but a choice that had run past its usefulness. She was done disappearing. The young woman on the gurney had a pelvic fracture and a laceration on her left thigh that was going to need surgical attention, and her name was Daniela, and she was scared, and Emily told her clearly what was happening and what was going to happen next, and what Daniela needed to do between now and when she went into the OR. And Daniela nodded and asked one sharp, specific question. Will I be able to walk normally after? That Emily answered honestly, which was, probably yes, but the surgical team would know more once they could see the full picture. Thank you for telling me the truth, Daniela said. That's the job, Emily said. She meant it completely. The trauma bay moved around her and she moved through it, and the work continued because the work always continued. And she was exactly where she had decided to be, doing exactly what she had always been built to do. And there was no longer any performance involved in any of it. The woman who everyone at Calloway General had decided was just a nurse stood in the trauma bay with her badge straight and her sling off. Okafor had cleared her for supervised clinical work 2 days ago, with conditions she followed precisely. And she worked with the full, undivided presence of someone who had stopped spending half their energy on staying invisible. Strength doesn't get smaller because someone refuses to see it. Emily had known this for a long time in a theoretical sense, the way you know something you were told before you understood it. She knew it differently now. She knew it the way you know things that have been tested under actual pressure and held. Not perfectly, not without cost, not without the specific human damage of a shoulder that would ache in cold weather for the rest of her life. And 4 years that she would never entirely stop feeling, but held. She knew it in her hands, which were steady. She knew it in her voice, which carried the weight she chose to put behind it. She knew it in the simple, unadorned fact of still being here. The monitors tracked. The morning continued, and Emily Carter, trauma team lead, Calloway General Medical Center, went to work.